Hi, and I apologize. We're starting a little bit later than planned. There was a technical glitch as I set up the equipment. I couldn't get Google Hangouts to recognize that there was a camera there, which kind of defeated the entire purpose of a Google Hangout. But it is Saturday, and this is the Google Semantic Search Community Hangout on air. I've put a link in the stream. Anybody who wants to join, please do so. You're most welcome to join live. And if not, then I will be monitoring the stream in case of questions which you have to ask. And really, this is a little bit of an overview. I had one a few months back into a Hangout, and it was time to have this one. And as it turns out, there's so many things which have happened in between that quite a few things have changed. And really, what I would like to focus primarily on and build from there is the degree to which data density requirements have changed in semantic search. And I'm going to have to explain this, obviously. So really, semantic search essentially, it always is a structured data issue or a structured data sort of basis. And by structured data, really what happens is Google indexes all the data that's out on the web. It creates a structured data of that data in its index, which makes sense of it in a way that you and I can understand it, rather than the sort of the blank code that used to be there before. And from there, it begins to build on the relationship basis of everything. And the more data we have in terms of how we put things in place, the easier it becomes and the more granular the approach is and the more semantic search is helped. And there are two things here which we need to think in mind. And the first one is, the first question, of course, is do we need to be knowledgeable in terms of creating semantic markup on our websites? And the second thing is, what does data density actually mean? What does it mean in plain English? And I'm going to cover both of these. Now, initially, semantic search did not really require you to have structured data on your website, and still really doesn't require you to do so. But it makes more and more sense, increasingly, to actually, if you can, to actually do so. And if you do that, then it helps in many, many ways. And I'm going to sort of touch base on some of them. But so let's before we go there, let's tackle the data density question. What exactly do we mean when we say data density? Well, everything which we do on the web requires data, and funnily enough, everything which we do offline requires data. And if we compare the two mediums, online and offline, the thing which makes the divide really appreciable is the fact that offline we don't have any kind of choice. We are data dense in everything we do. There are semantic signifiers in the way we dress, the way we speak, the way we conduct ourselves, where we live, where we choose to do business, how we do all these things. And it's layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of information, which is decoded at every point of contact with another individual, which allows that individual to contextualize the experience, create an assessment about you, and decide whether you fulfill what they need or not. And it is a very broad picture of how things operate in the offline world. So it's obviously a little bit more nuanced than that. But that's exactly how we operate. And the reason we can operate like that is because the data is there to actually allow us to do that. In the online world, it hasn't actually been that way. The data which we put there was obviously sometimes patchy or sketchy, simply because there was a lot of effort and a lot of focus in simply ticking a box, checking a box, in creating a presence. And by that, you need a website, check. You need to have it. It was a shell. The website needed to have perhaps 7, 8, 10 pages. If you have those pages, you say, yeah, great, this is what I actually needed to do. And then again, you checked, and the content of those pages needed to just be content which did some things, but it was not really data dense. It didn't really, was a lot of the times when you came across websites, they didn't have the kind of granularity that you expected in order to form the kind of sort of a picture which you needed. And now, of course, we are in a different world. We're in a different world because when websites get indexed, when the information gets indexed, when a search actually looks at the data, it requires a kind of data density because it's not enough for it to simply take bits and pieces and bring them into its index. It tries to understand them and how they fit together. And the better the picture of these pieces fitting together, the better the picture they form, the greater it actually is and the greater the benefits. I'm just going to check on the stream a little bit because okay. So anybody who wants to leap into the Hangout on the live event here, I'm going to give you the link. Okay, so and this is the broad picture of where we are. And what has happened recently? Let's look at it. Well, a number of things have happened. First and foremost, of course, authorship has gone. Authorship has gone away, and we're going to discuss that. We've got Mark here with us, who we are very happy to have him, and we'll sort of touch base upon this a little bit. What else has happened? Well, Google's Knowledge Vault has emerged. And Knowledge Vault, must be stressed, is not really a product as such. It's just an umbrella term, pretty much like Google use AuthorRank to signify a number of initiatives which happen internally within Google, which have a direct impact on semantic search. Now, those initiatives and what happened with authorship point towards a certain direction, which Google has always taken. Historically, Google has always moved away from anything which is human-driven. So anything which is relies upon people to actually help it understand how things should rank in search is problematic. It's problematic for a number of reasons. First of all, because sometimes people don't do it. Sometimes people do it, but they do it wrong in a wrong way. They create and make mistakes. And sometimes they game the system because they know what they're doing. And there's a temptation there to do that. We've seen that time and again with pretty much anything that search engine optimizers can actually understand and put together, and then it becomes accessible at human level. We have always tried a little bit to push things towards the direction that we want rather than the direction that Google wants. It's always been a bit of a dynamic tug of war kind of thing. Semantic search changed all that, but it still required a very strong human element, or certainly required the social signals and the contact and everything else which happened around it. It was a transition from strings, which were the ones and zeros in websites of the past, to things, to people. We haven't moved away from strings of things, but certainly Google now has sufficient amount of data to begin the machine learning process where machines basically do the heavy lifting, and it's looking to take the entire semantic search approach and the question of indexing information away from us and how we operate and give it to machines. And there are a lot of positives out of this. All this sounds a little bit scary. Some of the positives are that essentially machines don't sleep. They're always 24/7 on the web, and we aren't. Machines don't have preferences, so they don't just interact with the people they like and don't just go to the websites they like. So the information they generate and the signals they generate are always a lot broader, and certainly they allow a better and bigger indexing of the web. And also, machines don't make mistakes. So we have to assume a certain degree of infallibility when it comes to how bots operate. And that is a positive because we allow the indexing information and the data approach to actually scale up very quickly. This is exactly where authorship falls in, because authorship was a very human-generated signal that required an uptake by people in order to be there. And it was problematic almost from the start, as Mark will probably attest to. And at this point, perhaps it is good to have Mark's expertise, because anybody who doesn't know Mark Traphagen should be punished in the town square next week. I'm only kidding. Anybody who doesn't know Mark Traphagen, he is one of the eminent authorities on Google authorship. He actually is one of the first people who started testing this. And he has become, over the last couple of years, the acknowledged expert on Google Plus and outside it on the impact of authorship. And he was one of the first people who broke the story of Google abandoning authorship. So on that note, Mark, can I bring you in, please?
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me today, David. Good to be here with you, and this is a fascinating topic. And I'm delighted that you, took the opportunity to bring the whole authorship issue into this, because it certainly relates, but it relates in a very interesting way for those of us like you and me who try to be as good as we can, try to be data scientists about this, and try to watch what Google is doing with these things. Some people, I'll say it, some people have been taunting me the last few days because I have kind of been branded as a Google authorship expert, saying Mark Vang, in a very friendly kind of punch at me, started a fake Kickstarter campaign to try to help me out. Peter, you need to mute yourself, thanks, because you're getting echo, thanks. But I don't consider any of that time wasted, because for a number of reasons, but apropos to what we're talking about today, the whole Google authorship experiment has been such an incredible open door insight into the way Google is thinking, the way Google's trying to move, trying to do this. We have to remember it started 3 years ago, and that authorship, as we look at it now, in some sense was kind of a kludge forced onto the web. There already existed a standard within schema.org, which Google, along with other search engines, had adopted as a standard for an author entity type of tagging. Google really didn't adopt, Terry Simmons has been great at pointing this out, really did not adopt the strict schema.org tag. They did their own thing with it, and especially when they connected it to Google+, because now that made Google+ as the only, apparently, only active identity engine for this authorship project. So in some senses, that may have doomed it from the start. I certainly, I think in the beginning and for quite some time, they had hopes that there would be much broader adoption, both of Google+, and of authorship, that most content marketers would, not marketers, but content producers would see the benefit and go ahead and do the markup, make a Google+ profile, connect to it. And at the end of the day, as you said earlier, they found a couple of things. One was that there was nowhere near universal adoption. And while those who watch it were seeing a growing adoption in many verticals, there were huge parts of the web with valuable content that were not participating at all. Secondly, as a search signal, and that was the way that that was the carrot that they put out to try to get people to participate in this scheme. I'm going to say scheme, not schema, was to hold out the promise that if you participated, you could potentially get your photo showing up next to your search results. Who doesn't want to say, hey Ma, look, it's me in search? And I remember the very first time that a search result showed up with my photo next to it, and I'll admit it, it was like I felt like I got on the cover, that old 70s one-hit wonder song, on the cover of the Rolling Stone. But that aside, Google, what they said in their announcement this week, and they've been saying in subtler ways for some time, is that they were finding that using it in that way and putting it in that way into search as a rich snippet result was not giving searchers a real benefit. Now, why? You can speculate a lot of reasons for that, but I'll cut right to the chase here. I think when Google wants to use something as a ranking factor in search, that's a major decision. That's going to have a huge effect on the quality of search. And make no mistake, the quality of the search results is paramount at Google. Not just because they take pride in their product, which I think they do, but because they understand that that's their bread and butter. They're not going to make money if people stop using Google, and people will stop using Google if they're not getting good results. So why would authorship a bad result? Well, as it was being used, there was not yet in place, I don't think, all of the pieces to be able to say, this truly is an authoritative author. This particular author whom we're giving a photo next to and a byline, we're highlighting them in search, we have some rudimentary idea, but we don't really have everything in place to say, yes, we recommend this content. And when you put a rich snippet on something, it stands out in search, it implies that. It implies that Google is saying, like, you should go here first. I don't think that's a signal they were prepared yet to back up. So, all that to say, I think, that's why they've shut it down now. The bigger picture is, and I think this is where David is going, that does not mean at all that they have lost any interest in author authority. It simply means this method of doing it was an experiment. It didn't produce in the end the results they were looking for, and so they ended the experiment.
That's brilliant, and I think, Mark, you've hit so many things, you've hit so many good points with this overview. You're absolutely right in that. Almost from the moment that Google Plus authorship started, there were certain idiosyncrasies associated with it. I.e., it was a Google unique approach to the issue, and then that also highlighted a number of difficulties as well, because people actually did have a great amount of difficulty in implementing it correctly. And I think throughout the last 2 years, the number of times you've been tagged in conversation with people asking you for help on how to implement it correctly, and you've been keeping, you sort of kept on pointing to your articles, it's been countless. I thought, this is amazing, because all they had to do is search for the articles, and you've written very extensively on how it actually could be put in place. And the fact that this kind of difficulty was encountered is indicative, perhaps, of an approach that doesn't work very well. And on that note, we're experiencing almost the same kind of difficulty when it comes to implementing any kind of semantic markup at the moment, because there's simply no easy way of doing it. And again, there have been quite a number of discussions on how difficult it is to actually implement it or not implement it, what the penalties are, or the potential penalties if you don't, in terms of what you're going to lose and what you would gain if you do so. And this is the entire point of the discussion here, because essentially this is going to involve, and Omi is asking a question here, and you can unmute yourself and ask it, Omi, but he's put it in the chat and I will actually read it out. He says, will schema.org markup help boost my rankings? And here's the very broad message of we've been broadcasting since semantic search came into effect. There are no shortcuts, and there are no longer any kind of easy wins in terms of rankings. The entire principle of semantic search is that Google requires proof of concept before anything works for you, which means that if you are saying, for instance, that you are the absolute best in something and your website should be there, Google needs additional proof beyond your saying so on your website, which is the entire sort of approach. And the way to do this is through relational connections across the web. So if, for instance, your website is actually really good at something and your business is great and you're winning in terms of quality and customer experience, then it is highly unlikely that all this happens in a silo and you're never mentioned anywhere else apart from your own website. This is part of the data density, essentially. Not only in order to generate a kind of digital footprint, you have to have on your own website the kind of information, the kind of approach, the kind of meticulous attention to detail that actually generates a very positive feel-good factor from anybody who comes across it, anybody who engages with you in your business, and anybody who actually comes into contact with you and take things further. So in a nutshell, we're going to a very human approach, although we're still talking things which are highly technical, and they're only going to get more so. But if you use that human approach as your guiding factor, then you are unlikely to ever really encounter problems. And I think Mark has said again in many Hangouts on air, how Google has said that you do not chase search engines, you chase the quality on your website. You don't go and worry about what search does, or what the latest changes, or how to build links, or anything like that, but you focus on what you're really good at and try to get better every time. And if you do that, then everything else takes care of itself.
Yeah, you should think of you should think of the things like markup and doing good basic on-site SEO, those types of things, as just the mechanics of enabling search engines like Google to understand your information better and access it better. That's important to do. But in order to be successful, you need to do the things that David is saying. I definitely affirm that. David, I just want to jump in because we're getting a number of questions in the Q&A app,
Yep.
Peter Catherine and others, about the publisher markup, rel equals publisher, which is the connection between a website and in Google and the website's Google Plus page. And they're asking, is that still good to do? Is that still supported? Just want to clarify on that. Yes, very much so. John Mueller affirmed publicly yesterday and privately to me beforehand that the publisher markup is not at all affected by this change. In fact, it's quite the opposite. They are seeing great benefit out of that. It is useful for them in the ways that they're using it, and they do encourage us still to use that that connection. And someone else just sort of to hijack here for a moment, but just to clarify, we're getting some questions about this. Someone else asking, Hortense asked about whether we should still hook up to our Google Plus profiles, hook our content to our Google Plus profiles, use the markup and everything. First of all, let's make clear, there is no harm in leaving your rel equals author links in place. That won't harm anything. You won't get penalized for it. It's simply that Google is not using that, not tracking that data in the way that they were up until 2 days ago. So that's the first thing. I think there's still benefit in providing that link because I think in the long run, anything that helps search engines identify who you are, and when you are linking your author bylines or whatever your content across the web to a well-established social profile like the Google Plus profile, that's a great identity marker. Remember, again, what David was talking about a moment ago. You do these things not as a ranking factor, but you do these things to help the search engines better understand who you are and what you're about. So I would advise to continue to do that.
Indeed, and I think that's a beautiful point to bring up because exactly it falls into the data density we're talking about, and essentially, if you don't create a web presence which is as fully fleshed as possible, then you are unlikely to benefit in the long term of what semantic search has to offer. And authorship is one of them. It's one of the dots. Google now doesn't support it, but that doesn't mean that the data is inert. It doesn't do anything for you. It is there, and it should be there because at the end of the day, it is your content, and you should be claiming it. So going back into the dark ages of the web when anything went and content was out there hanging on its own as orphan content, perhaps it's not an option you should be thinking about at this stage. I'm just checking for quick comments on this. Peter Hatherley says that agrees with you, Mark. He says it is too true in regard to setting up authorship. It's why it was a bit of a disappointment for him, and I suspect he's talking about the level of difficulty and the poor uptake on this. A little bit on that note, again, talking about what Omis asked before about whether schema will help boost your rankings. The answer to that is a flat no. Implementing any schema.org markup is not a ranking signal for the same reasons pretty much that authorship was really. There's a very poor uptake. Google is not very sure about the veracity of the data. Having said that, it is always very helpful to do. If you can do this on your website, you're basically helping search understand your data a little bit better, and that is definitely a good thing to do. And it does require a little bit of knowledge in terms of programming and HTML. If you haven't got that, Google has a markup tool you can use, which applies an overlay on specific pages of your website, where you can identify specific elements on those pages and label them with semantic markup. But again, it's something that is easy to implement, but it's only good perhaps for static pages which don't change very often, and it has a very sort of limited approach because it only carries so many items instead of everything what schema gives you. Google is bound to look at the implementation of consistent markup across our website as an additional mark of quality if everything else also ticks the box in that respect. So it's not an easy win that, if your website isn't up to scratch, implementing schema.org markup isn't going to help in any way. But if you have a fantastically laid out website, if your content is brilliant, if every element there in the website actually does a very specific job and it helps the end user experience become better and better, then having semantic markup in some format is actually an additional win. Are there any more questions in the stream?
Yeah, I'm seeing some. And one popped up a moment ago in the Q&A app. By the way, if anybody's watching outside to the event, you might want to pop out the full Q&A app and use that. And please upvote questions that people are asking that seem useful, because that brings them to the top for us here within the Hangout. A moment ago, just again, I don't want to draw our discussion too much away from the central thing that you're doing, but I saw Pepper asked if she was confused about what's the difference between the publisher markup and the authorship markup. Two things quickly. The publisher markup is simply for identifying a brand online. And that can be a person if your person is a brand, but it links not to content, but it links to a website. So it's meant to establish a verified link for Google between, this is my brand, so I'm XYZ Shoes, and here's my official website. And you make a two-way link between those two, and Google can say, okay, now this brand page, this Google Plus page represents that brand, and we can begin to track things through that. They're doing some things with that. They're doing some things, for instance, in showing a knowledge panel result. When people search for your brand name on Google search, they might see, especially if you're active on that Google Plus page, they might see a box pop up to the right instead of ads, giving details about your company, showing your latest Google Plus posts, things like that. There are some other benefits. The other quick question I wanted to answer, Pepper asked, does that mean it will still show up with an image in search? There's a little confusion over this, and I want to just clarify this, that we are still seeing at this point in the personalized search, logged in search, if you're logged into your Google Plus account, you can still see results from people that you have circled and brand pages that you have circled that will get elevated in those results because Google sees you have some relationship with them. You've circled them. And those actually can show up, now at least in the US, with a authorship style snippet. The author photo or a brand logo photo from the Google Plus page when you do a relevant search for content that's on Google Plus. I'm going to emphasize that's only Google Plus content. It's not really authorship, not the same way that we thought about it. It's only when you search logged in.
That's a very good clarification. And again, it points out to Google's approach to collecting data in an almost automated fashion and beginning to assess it in terms of verification. We're approaching near the end of a Hangout, and really what I really want to point out is that the value of having so much data on the web is it allows one of the 4 principles of semantic search to actually come into play. And just as a reminder, semantic search is driven by the same principles that big data is driven by, and that's volume of information, the variety of that information, the velocity of that information, how quickly it travels and spreads, and the final thing is the veracity. And that's the actual clincher, because essentially we all want information and data which has a high level of accuracy in which we can trust, and Google wants the same thing. There are machine learning algorithms which have succeeded in closed data sets so far to reach a high probability factor of veracity by sorting through facts and cross-referencing all the information across them. And the probability factor of accuracy is 96% across fairly difficult subjects. What does that mean for you and I if you're a marketer? You are basically you need now to make sure that you really join every single dot you can. That data-centric approach needs to work for you. You need to clarify yourself online as much as possible. And if I just bring Mark in now to actually make one more point on authorship on the subject. Mark?
Yeah, actually, this is not an authorship, but I'm more on your general topic. Something you and I
Okay.
think we discussed outside of this, David, is interesting for people to know. One thing that's come out of the general authorship thing happening the last couple of days is John Mueller just kind of almost offhand saying part of the decision to remove authorship was a data budget decision. People assume this is a great thing to learn. People assume that Google has unlimited resources. Because it's such a big company, they're so rich that it's just like they can do anything. And it's a good lesson to learn here that they can't. That it's even for them, it's a struggle. They have to make decisions about, what do we do in terms of the processing power that it will take, and do we get a benefit for users and for ourselves in terms of the data that the processing power that takes. So just a good thing to learn. That doesn't mean that they won't eventually expand to be able to do that, but it does mean that some of the things we're talking about could take longer to implement than people want to. I get this all the time. People assume that if Google has even mentioned something that we'd like to do this, or this is something we'd like to track, that, oh, they must be doing it, because of course to Google they can, right, David?
That's a brilliant point. And I think we need to remind ourselves that ultimately anything which takes place anywhere, not just online, but anywhere in the world in any kind of fashion, is always a combination of the effort and the energy required to do something and the returns you're going to get from it. And sometimes the returns are long term, sometimes they're short term. But if those returns are always less than what you're doing, than the effort required, then eventually you're going to give up. And this is exactly the case. This works right across the world. It works on everything across the world of physics. Omi has a question there about data density and keywords. It says, what's the future? And well, really, although keywords are always important, they have to occur very naturally now. You shouldn't be focusing on them at all. And you should actually be focusing on topics instead. In the past, we used to create specific pages, specific keywords, hoping the page, or trying to get a page to rank for those keywords, because that's how we're going to get traffic to our website. And that definitely doesn't work anymore. Really, you need to have expertise, authority, and trustworthiness built into your website. The only way to do that is to have the kind of information which really does what it says. It's really helpful, it's really useful, and perhaps in certain cases it's unique. And if you can do all those things, then everything else goes by the wayside. Any more questions or anything like this from anybody else on the stream? I'm just checking.
I'm not seeing any that particularly. You kind of answered. Someone had one that was related to keywords, so I think you just really answered it. This is an interesting one, maybe here if you got time for it, David. Pierce Ivory asked earlier, how will Google gauge ownership of content in the future?
Well, the easy, within inverted commas here, answer to that one is through relational mining and ascribe value to those relationships that it finds. And really what I mean by that is essentially, suppose, for instance, let's try, if Mark publishes something on the web and he doesn't claim his authorship of that directly, but he has his byline there, and that's all he does. He doesn't even point to it in anywhere from anything he does. Mark is a fairly established authority on the web, and Google would actually go into a lot of trouble, find out what he is and what he does, realize he's an entity, and as it continually mines information, it will eventually come across that article which Mark hasn't claimed. He will see the byline, he will see how else that article is connected to whom, and obviously because of the way that Mark, the circles that Mark operates in, there will be other people who are relevant to that industry to some degree, even if it's tangential, and from that it'll be inferences drawn, and that article will be linked eventually to Mark. It may take a little bit of time, but it'll happen, and that's a very broad example of how Google would actually do it. The interesting question, of course, comes, what happens if you're a highly specialized author who hasn't got a great impact on the web, or you're perhaps a relatively obscure author who isn't very well known? And here again, the answer comes down to the data density, in that if your presence online is patchy, then think of it as the same kind of effect your presence offline would be. If the only person in the world who knows you is your mother and your next door neighbor, well, we could argue that as much as they love you and know you and like you, your impact in the world is minimal, and not many people can actually establish what you're good at and how important you are. If, on the other hand, you're President Obama, maybe you're not very well loved, your impact is established and everybody agrees on it. So, because his digital footprint is very data dense. This is what it is. And, and his offline footprint is also data dense. And that's exactly the kind of thinking that you need to keep in mind as you create now your digital presence online. Takeaways here: if you're doing anything online, it has to have a thoroughly worked out logic, as much data as you can throw at it, and you link all the dots so it actually justify what you're doing in terms of everything else that happened before. You just can't pop up somewhere out of nowhere and expect to have an impact. Mark, closing thoughts?
I think that's a brilliant point to close on, David, because a lot of people, it's just such a great lesson for people, because people assume, again, just like they assume Google can do anything, they assume that if Google gives us something like, say, rel equals author markup, that automatically means you're going to do better in search. You're going to, like, just if I do this one thing, if I connect up authorship, or if I have a Google Plus profile, or if I, whatever it is, people look for this magic bullet, and they think that's automatically going to make me rank higher. Well, as my boss Eric Enga always says, think about if it were your search engine. Would you, just somebody who stranger comes out of the blue, does some kind of proper markup on their site, would you say, like, oh, I should rank them higher now? I mean, they're giving you no reason for that. So I think the things that David just said are great wisdom. It's never a short-term project. It's never do these 3 simple things and you'll rank higher. What's more important now than ever is the things that David just taught you, is working for that long-term effect, building the relationships, building the authority off and online, making the connections that get you known, that get you recommended as an expert in whatever it is that you're doing.
Indeed, absolutely. And well, thank you for joining us in the Google Semantic Search community. I hope you found this useful and helpful. And so many things have actually happened since the last one. It's always a concern sometimes for me when I hold this, that there wouldn't be enough informational data to actually discuss things in any depth. And this is clearly not the case. We could actually have them a lot more often. I'll try and share one before Christmas, or just before Christmas. And by then, of course, we'll have seen the true impact of the withdrawal of authorship from websites, and the impact in terms of how that works in subsequent ranking of specific websites. And that'll give us another picture of how things are going. Thank you very much, and have a great weekend. Take care. Bye-bye.